My grandmother leaned across my birthday dinner table and casually asked if my $5 million trust distribution had come through yet, and the way my parents went instantly pale told me everything before a single additional word was spoken about the money they had hidden from me for 28 years. I was eating cake when my life split in half. Not metaphorically. Literally. I had a fork in my hand, a piece of my own birthday cake, chocolate with raspberry filling because that is what I have asked for every year since I was 7 years old, and my grandmother leaned forward across the table with the casual ease of a woman who has never once in her life had to choose her words carefully around money, and she said it. Just said it. The way you ask someone if they got a package you sent, or whether they received an email you forwarded. Offhand. Neighborly. Like the answer was obviously yes and she just wanted to confirm. Darling, did your distribution come through yet? The $5 million? I've been meaning to ask. The fork was still in my hand. I remember that specifically. I did not put it down. I just stopped moving entirely, the way animals go still when something in the air changes, and I looked at my grandmother, and then I looked at my parents, and what I saw on my parents' faces was the thing that told me everything before a single additional word was spoken. They went pale. Not the slow fade of discomfort. Instantly pale, the kind of colorlessness that happens when blood actually retreats from a face because the body is responding to something that feels like danger. My father picked up his napkin and put it down again without using it. My mother looked at the centerpiece, a cluster of white peonies she had arranged that morning with the focused care she brings to anything she wants to appear effortless, and she did not look up from it for a very long time. They could not look at anyone. My grandmother, 81 years old, sharp as a letter opener, registered none of this. Or perhaps she registered all of it. I still do not know which. She smiled at me and waited for my answer. I did not have an answer. I was 28 years old, sitting at my birthday dinner in the house I grew up in, and I had never, not once, heard the words $5 million trust come out of anyone's mouth in connection with my name. My name is Claire. And apparently, for a significant portion of my life, I had been the beneficiary of a trust I did not know existed. Let me tell you about my family before I tell you what happened next, because context matters even when it makes you angrier in retrospect. My parents are not poor. They are not wealthy in the way my grandmother is wealthy, which is the old, quiet, doesn't talk about it kind of wealthy that expresses itself in quality over quantity and a certain unhurried confidence about the future. My parents are comfortable. My father has run his own architecture firm for 25 years. My mother consults for nonprofits and sits on 2 boards. We had a nice house, good schools, travel every summer, the specific texture of a life that is never in want without ever being ostentatious. I never thought to ask where exactly the comfort came from. Children of comfortable families rarely do. The money is just there, ambient, like weather. My grandmother on my mother's side, Eleanor, established a trust for me when I was born. This is not unusual in families like hers. She set up trusts for all her grandchildren. A cousin of mine in Seattle received his at 25, another cousin in London received hers at 26. The distributions were structured differently for each grandchild, tied to age thresholds and in my case to an additional clause that my grandmother described, still casually, still in her birthday dinner voice, as tied to your completing your graduate degree, which you did 2 years ago, darling, so I assumed it had all been sorted. It had not been sorted. It had not been sorted because my parents, who were the named trustees for my distribution given my age at the time the trust was established, had not told me the trust existed. I want to be precise here about what that means legally and personally, because I have had 2 years to sit with it and I still find myself having to restate it plainly to make it feel real. My grandmother created a legal instrument in my name. She funded it. She structured a distribution event key to a milestone I reached 2 years ago. The mechanism was in place. The money was there, in my name, in trust, waiting for me to claim it, and the only thing standing between me and the knowledge that it existed were the 2 people who were supposed to be acting in my interest. My parents. The dinner did not explode. That is the thing about certain kinds of family catastrophe. They do not always announce themselves with noise. The conversation around the table shifted with the awkward, effortful quality of a group of people trying to drag a stalled vehicle back onto the road. My aunt, my mother's sister, developed a sudden intense interest in the centerpiece. My uncle refilled everyone's wine with the focused generosity of a man buying time. My younger brother, 19 and largely unaware of what had just been detonated, asked about dessert alternatives. My grandmother seemed to realize, within a few minutes, that something was wrong in a way she hadn't accounted for. She looked at my mother. My mother was still looking at the peonies. My grandmother looked back at me, and for just a moment, the casual confidence in her face shifted into something more careful. More worried. Has there been some confusion with the paperwork? She asked. I think so, I said, because it was the only thing I could say that was technically true without being a grenade. We got through dinner. I do not know how, but we got through it. The cake was cleared. People said their goodbyes. My grandmother held my face in her hands when she hugged me at the door and said, "We'll get this sorted, darling, don't worry," and I nodded and smiled and held it together until her car was at the end of the driveway. Then I walked back inside, and I looked at my parents, and I said, very quietly, "Tell me everything." What followed was 2.5 hours at the kitchen table that I will never fully be able to describe in terms that convey how it actually felt. My father talked more than my mother. He is the talker in a crisis, the explainer, the man who believes that if he can organize something into coherent enough sentences it becomes manageable. He explained. He used words like oversight and intention, and we always meant to, and we wanted to wait for the right time, and it was complicated with the trustee structure, and we were trying to protect you. My mother sat beside him and said almost nothing. She had her hands around a mug of tea she never drank, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked like the face of a person who has been waiting a very long time for a conversation to arrive and now that it's here cannot find any of the words they had prepared. The shape of what happened, as best I could reconstruct it from my father's careful explaining and my mother's careful silence, was this. The trust distribution had been triggered 2 years earlier when I completed my master's degree. At that point, my parents, as trustees, were notified. They had the legal mechanism to inform me, to facilitate the distribution, to transfer what was mine. They did not do this. Instead, they petitioned the trust attorney for a delay, citing some technicality about my readiness, a clause in the original trust language that allowed for trustee discretion under specific circumstances. They bought themselves time. What they did with that time is the part that took the longest to come out, and the part that has taken the longest to sit with. The trust, while waiting for distribution, had continued to accumulate. The principal had been invested. My parents, as trustees, had certain administrative access. They had not stolen from the trust. I want to be precise about this. The money was still there, the $5 million was accounted for. But they had used the delay period to restructure aspects of their own finances in ways that depended on the continued existence of the trust. On the continued existence of the trust in their name rather than mine. I am not a financial expert. I am a landscape architect with a master's degree in what turned out to be a $5 million trust fund, and even after 2 years of attorneys and accountants explaining things to me, I cannot fully describe the technical details of what my parents did. What I can describe is the functional outcome. They were not ready for me to know. They had built something, their own financial stability, their own architecture of comfort, partially around my not knowing what I had. Around my continuing to be, financially, their child. Around the story that we were all simply comfortable, quietly, sufficiently, without dramatic specifics, just comfortable, the way nice families are. Don't ask too many questions, just be grateful. Here is your birthday cake with a raspberry filling, darling, every year since you were 7. The money was always mine. The not knowing was a structure they had built around it. And that structure had held for 28 years until Eleanor leaned forward across a birthday dinner table with the breezy confidence of a woman who assumed, reasonably, that adults tell their children the truth. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, in the house I had grown up in, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a comfortable life, the good furniture, the art on the walls, the quality of everything that I had absorbed as simply how we were, and I tried to locate something solid to put my weight on. There was nothing. Or rather, what had felt solid was revealed to be something else. Not nothing. Something I didn't have a name for yet. I called a lawyer the next morning. My own lawyer. Not the family attorney, not anyone my parents had ever used or recommended. I found her through a friend, a woman who specialized in trust law and estates, and I sat in her office 4 days after my birthday and I told her everything I knew and she listened without expression, and then she asked me several precise questions about dates and documents and the trustee structure, and she wrote things down in a yellow legal pad. At the end she looked at me and said, "You understand that as the beneficiary, this is your money. It has always been your money." I understood it intellectually. It took considerably longer to understand it in any other way. My grandmother, once she understood the full shape of what had happened, was quietly furious in the way only certain elderly women can be furious, which is completely and without theatrics and with a precision that is more frightening than any raised voice. She contacted her own attorneys. She contacted the trust administrator. She made several phone calls to my mother that I was not present for, but that my aunt, who was present for one of them, described to me later as very difficult. My parents hired their own attorney. We were, within 6 weeks of my birthday dinner, in the specific kind of family dispute where everyone has legal representation and no one is speaking directly to anyone else, everything mediated through formal letters and formal language that turns the people you grew up loving into opposing parties. I want to tell you what that is like, Because I think people imagine it as primarily a legal process. It is primarily a grief process that happens to require lawyers. It is the specific grief of looking at the people who raised you and being unable to locate, underneath all the explaining and the legal maneuvering, the simple straightforward truth of why they did what they did. I know the practical reasons. I can list them. I am not sure I will ever know the real ones. The thing that I keep coming back to, in the nights when I cannot stop turning it over, is this: they had the opportunity, many times, to tell me. The trust was not a secret in my grandmother's world. My cousins knew about their own trusts. It was not hidden information. It was family information, private but known within the appropriate circle, and I was not in that circle. I was kept outside it, fed a version of our family's financial story that was close enough to true to be convincing and different enough from true to serve a purpose. I was kept a child in the specific way that keeping someone from their money keeps them a child. I do not know if my parents thought about it in those terms. I suspect they told themselves a more comfortable story, something about protection, about not wanting me to lose my work ethic or my drive or my groundedness, the things people say when they are explaining why they didn't give someone something that was already theirs. I suspect the story they told themselves was mostly true, that there was real concern for me embedded in what they did, that they were not simply bad people doing a bad thing. I also know that real concern and genuine harm are not mutually exclusive. You can love someone and wrong them at the same time. The love does not cancel the wrong. My father tried to hug me, at one point, in the weeks before everything went fully legal. He came to my apartment, unannounced, which he had never done before, and he stood in my doorway looking smaller than I had ever seen him look, and he said he was sorry, and I could see that he meant it, and I stepped back from the hug because I did not know yet how to let someone be sorry when I was still inside the initial shock of what they had done, and the look on his face when I stepped back is something I still carry. I carry it next to the look on my mother's face when she was staring at the peonies. I carry a lot of looks now that I did not know I would have to carry. The legal resolution took 14 months. I will tell you about it in part 2. What I will tell you here, at the end of part 1, is what my birthday looks like now. I still ask for chocolate cake with raspberry filling. I still get it. But I eat it alone now, or with friends, in my own apartment, and I do not sit at a table with my parents, and the absence of that table is something I feel every year in late April when the light turns a certain way and I think about peonies and silence, and the specific sound of someone who cannot look at you. She asked about $5 million and she thought it was common knowledge. She was right. It should have been. The distribution cleared on a Thursday in October. My attorney called me at 10:47 in the morning and told me in professional, measured language that the funds had been transferred and that I should confirm receipt with the account we had established. I sat at my desk in my home office, in the apartment I had been renting for 3 years on a landscape architect's salary, and I looked at the number on my screen and I felt nothing that resembled what I had imagined feeling. I had imagined, in the months of legal proceedings, that the resolution would feel like something. Like arrival, or relief, or vindication, or even just a clean page. What it actually felt like was the end of a long illness. Not health. Just the end of being actively sick. A different kind of emptiness, quieter, without the acute pain but also without whatever comes after pain when you've processed it correctly. I had not processed it correctly. I was not done processing it. I am still not done. Let me tell you about the 14 months between my birthday dinner and that Thursday in October, because they reshaped things in ways that money, whatever its amount, cannot reshape back. The legal process was, on paper, relatively clean. My grandmother's trust was unambiguous. The money was mine. My parents' delay and the financial restructuring they had done around the trust during that delay was the complicated part, and it was complicated in the specific way that family financial entanglements are complicated, which is that the law can parse them and assign liability and establish restitution, but it cannot actually answer the question underneath all of it, which is, why? My parents' attorney was good. My attorney was better. I say this not with satisfaction but with the flatness of a fact. The outcome was that I received a full distribution as originally structured, plus interest that had accumulated during the delay period. My parents were required to divest certain financial instruments they had structured around the trust's continued management, which created a significant disruption to their own financial picture. Not ruin. My parents are not ruined. But something real was lost on their end, and I know this, and I have had to decide what to do with knowing it. What I have done with knowing it, mostly, is carry it alongside everything else. My mother and I did not speak for 9 months. I want to say that clearly because I think people soften these things when they tell them, use phrases like we were estranged for a while or things were difficult, and those phrases do not capture what 9 months of not speaking to your mother actually feels like. It feels like a structural absence. Like a room in your internal house that you keep accidentally walking toward and then remembering you cannot enter. I reached for my phone to call her probably 40 times in those 9 months. Stopped myself each time. Not out of cruelty. Out of self-preservation and the recognition that I did not yet know how to have the conversation that would need to happen before any other conversations could happen. My father called me twice in those 9 months. Both times I answered. Both calls were painful in different ways, the first because he was still explaining, still organizing it into sentences he believed would make it manageable, and the second because he had stopped explaining and there was just silence and breathing on the phone, and he said my name and I said I know, Dad, and neither of us said anything after that for a long time. My brother, who is 9 years younger than me and was 19 at my birthday dinner, has been the strangest casualty of all of this. He did not know about the trust either. He found out the same night I did, in the same kitchen, hearing the same explanation from our father. But his experience of it was different from mine because he is 19, which means he processed it primarily as a drama happening to his older sister, which is not a criticism, it is just the developmental reality of being 19. As the months went on and the legal situation became real and the family silence became real, he was caught in the middle in a way no one chose for him and no one adequately helped him navigate. He sided with our parents, is the practical reality. Not in any declaration. Not with any cruelty toward me. But in the way that 19-year-olds side with the parents they live with, the parents who make dinner and drive them places and represent the physical daily architecture of home. He became quieter with me. More careful. The ease that used to exist between us, the ease of a younger sibling who has always known you and teases you and tells you things he wouldn't tell anyone else, that ease developed a new formality that grieves separately from everything else. I miss my brother. I see him occasionally. It is not the same. My grandmother was the most constant through all of it. She called me every Sunday for the entire 14 months, consistent as weather, and she talked about her garden and her friends and the book she was reading, and she did not talk about the legal proceedings unless I brought them up. She was, in the specific way of her generation and her particular character, holding space for me through the most ordinary means possible, regular contact, presence, the declaration that I remained part of the story. I did not fully appreciate this until later. I appreciate it enormously now. The thing about receiving a significant amount of money in the circumstances in which I received it is that it does not simplify your life. This is contrary to what most people imagine. People imagine that $5 million arriving in your account would clarify things, would make the loss of the other things at least balanced, would give you the feeling of having won something. What it actually gives you is the resources to build a new life while simultaneously being surrounded by all the evidence of what the old life cost. I bought an apartment. I increased my work in the field I love. I traveled, some, to places I had been putting off. I did things that the financial security enabled and that I am genuinely glad of. None of it touched the place inside me that the birthday dinner had hollowed out. Because the thing that was taken from me was not primarily money. The money was always there, waiting, growing, mine. What was taken was the 28 years of believing one story about my family when a different story was also true. What was taken was my place in the circle of people who knew. What was taken was the specific trust of a child in her parents, which is a structure built so early and so deep that when it's damaged in adulthood the damage reaches all the way back to the beginning. I think about the moments differently now. I think about being a child and having everything I needed and feeling grateful for my parents and feeling lucky and secure, and I think about how that feeling was real and also how it existed on top of something I didn't know. I cannot make those two things stop being simultaneously true. The security was real. The incomplete story it was built on was also real. I was loved. I was also managed. My mother and I resumed contact after 9 months. I will not describe the first conversation in full because some things are still too close. I will say that it was long, and that my mother cried in a way I had not seen since my grandfather's funeral when I was 12, and that she said things I had waited a long time to hear her say without explanation attached to them, just the things themselves, the acknowledgement, the specific naming of what had happened. I listened. I did not forgive immediately. Forgiveness, I have come to understand, is not a moment but a long and uneven practice, a thing you do repeatedly and imperfectly and then have to do again. I am still in the middle of it. I am forgiving my mother with approximately the same consistency and inconsistency that she tended to whatever she was tending to in the 9 months I was not speaking to her. My father and I are working on something different. We do not have the emotional vocabulary between us that my mother and I have always had. We are an architecture firm and a yellow legal pad in a conversation about protecting versus trusting, and we are still finding the language. He is trying. I am trying. Some weeks I believe we will eventually reach something solid. Other weeks I drive past his firm's building on my way to a site visit, and I feel the distance like weather. Here is what I know now, at 30 years old, 2 years past the birthday dinner and 14 months past the resolution, and whatever this is past the beginning of trying to reassemble something from the pieces. I know that the instinct to protect someone you love can become, without your fully noticing, the habit of controlling them. I know that keeping someone in the dark about what is theirs does not keep them safe. It keeps them dependent. I know that financial secrecy inside families is one of the oldest ways that love and power get confused with each other, and that the people doing the confusing usually believe the story they are telling themselves. I know that my grandmother, 81 years old and sharper than anyone at that table, asked one question and told the truth without even meaning to. She simply assumed that the people responsible for giving me my own information had done so. She assumed that the adults around her table were operating inside the same reality she was. One question. Lean forward. Ask about the 5 million. Happy birthday, darling? The table went silent. 2 years later, I am still in the business of learning what silence costs, and who pays it, and how long the bill runs. My birthday was last week. I had friends over, people I have built close to me in the years since everything changed, people who know the story and who did not require me to explain or perform or pretend. We had chocolate cake with raspberry filling. Someone made a toast that was genuinely funny and I laughed a real laugh, not the performance of one. It was a good evening. It was also, underneath the good evening, a birthday without the table where I always used to sit. Without the peonies. Without the easy assumption that the people who raised me were telling me everything important about who I was in the world and what was mine. $5 million was mine. It will never stop being true that I did not know. And no amount of resolution, legal or personal, gives you back the years you spent not knowing what you deserve to know about your own life. That is the number that stays with me. Not 5 million. 28.